My name is Michael Anthony.
Come on in.
No wonder people love television.
Mr. Carey, I have a cashier's check for you for $1 million.
Millionaires gave away money. Dads gave out advice.
You better have a better reason than because when you break the news to Buck.
By 1959, you could sit in your living room, secure in the knowledge that any problem could be solved by the time the credits rolled.
Did you tell him he's the new den mother?
But not all the scripts were being written in Hollywood. Castro's revolution was moving north.
This is only the beginning. The last battle will be fought in the capital. You can be sure.
The overthrow of Cuban dictator Batista was a fact we first celebrated. But by the time Castro met with Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev in New York, it was clear whose side he was on. He was thrown out of the Waldorf for roasting chickens in the hall and moved uptown to Harlem's Hotel Teresa, where he continued strutting with world leaders. But the city's critics were decidedly mixed. Watching what seemed like chaos all afternoon, no wonder we sought law and order in the evening.
Matt Dillon, U.S. Marshal.
Could there be a relation, as some suggest, between television fare and the yearnings of a culture? If so, then it's no accident that by the fall of 1960, westerns like Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel, and Rawhide had become an obsession. They were the most popular shows on Channel 2, the most popular shows in the country. Father no longer knew best, unless he could ride into town and clean up the bad guys. Clearly, we were looking for a white hat who rode tall in the saddle. The country was ready for a showdown. It came on the night of September 26, 1960, at the CBS studio in Chicago.
Mr. Smith, Mr. Nixon. In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist, half slave or half free. In the election of 1960, and with the world around us,
in addition,
the question
which
is
will
whether
see
the world will exist.
that our medical care for the aged is much better handled than it is at the present time.
When it was over, we didn't have to wait for election day. A president was elected that night in the studio in Chicago.
Don Hewitt directed the debate that night.
I know I left there that night figuring, you know, I decided when I would take a shot at Nixon, when I'd take a shot at Kennedy, and how they would look and how they wouldn't look. And I said, nobody should have that much power. It's wrong. There's something wrong with it. You shouldn't elect your presidents by who is the better performer.
But there was a bigger problem with TV contests.
The next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Van Oker.
Mr. Vice President.
Anytime during the game you can quit, go home with what you've won, or if you go ahead and miss, you go home with nothing, okay?
The quiz show scandals rocked the industry. Programs like the $64,000 question had captivated audiences, whether it was a 12-year-old rocket scientist or a baseball fanatic.
Nap Lajoie.
Nat Lajoie is 5, one more.
Powell Weiner.
You're right!
Viewers tuned in every week to watch them scale the heights, until everything came tumbling down. Though nobody ever proved the $64,000 question was rigged, the well had been poisoned for network game shows.
And like the little kid who's been caught with his hand in the frosting, you know, the broadcast executives went down to Washington and said, we'll be good, you know, and we're going to give the public really responsible programming now. And documentaries was a logical form at that time to follow.
WCBS built an entire news organization specifically for the tri-state area, something it had never done before. And the centerpiece was the first locally produced documentary series, Eye on New York.
It was a very exciting time to be working at WCBS because the station had decided that they were going to put on a prime-time documentary every week. Here we were in New York City, which is a real creative center of the world. And so our films could sort of push the envelope out a little bit further. So while we did deal with subjects like illiteracy and the need for historic preservation, we could also do films about the arts and the creativity that was going on in New York City.
Years and years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales and birds the colour of red flannel petticoats whisked past the half-shaved hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like...
Famous names were drawn to the innovative local program, Camera 3.
WCBS was as exciting for filmmakers as, say, the Shakespeare Theater was for actors and directors, you know, downtown. I mean, it was really a real creative high in those days.
We really thought we were going to change the world. I mean, that sounds simplistic today, right? But we were going to take our lights and our cameras and say, look, America. We did films about the voiceless. We did films about the oppressed. We did films about institutions of government that weren't being responsible to the people they were supposed to serve. Our shows made people nervous. I don't think we changed the world. I think we put our lights and cameras on some glaring social issues, and every now and then a little something would happen, but the problems remain. But at least we made it so that people couldn't hide from.
This is what the world could no longer hide from.
The last census, taken in 1960, lists almost 135,000 dwelling units in Newark. Of those, more than 22,000 were rated below standard. That means 16% of all dwelling units were not fit to live in.
Our investigative reporter, Martin Stedman, has been doing a preliminary survey of cities in our metropolitan area which might experience racial difficulties over the summer.
And the trouble had already begun across the country. Birmingham, Selma, Memphis. Now even primetime began to explore the dramatic confrontations in our society. Only this time, rather than the Badlands of Arizona, it was in the canyons of New York. And while they could tackle important social issues in prime time, you still couldn't say certain things in the afternoon.
Lisa, I think having another child would be the best thing that could happen to us right now.
And I had to sit there and say, now that I'm carrying Bob's child. And I said, no woman would say, now that I'm carrying Bob's child, to her mother and her mother-in-law when she's sitting there drinking coffee early in the morning. She says, now that I'm pregnant, blah, blah. And they said, you can't say that word. If you say that word, the Simpsons are going to cut you right off the air, and you'll never work again.
In fact, it would be safe to say that Eileen Fulton hasn't had an idle moment since.
Hi, Bruce.
Well, Lisa?
I play the part of Lisa on As the World Turns. Her name is Lisa. Miller, Hughes, Eldridge, Hughes, Shea, Coleman, almost Hadley, McCall, now Mitchell, now Looking. 31 years I've done this.
As the World Turns, as it ran one afternoon in November of 1963.
Already? Well, yes, that's right. Ain't it a little early for that? Ain't Hannah coming tomorrow?
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
I have to go back to something that really shocked me. When President Kennedy was assassinated, people were actually upset because the soaps weren't on.
Chris Santana worked the switchboards at CBS.
If the soaps aren't on, that generates more traffic than anything. You know, they're used to watching the soap operas, and they don't care about the president or anything else until after that's all over. Put it on the 6 o'clock news. No?
They've been told that KRLD is saying.
Well, that's a repeat of something that you heard reported to you directly a moment ago from KRLD television in Dallas, and that is the rumor that has reached them at the hotel that the president is dead. Totally unconfirmed, apparently, as yet.
The day Kennedy was shot, I remember we worked day and night for 4 days. And I felt with those people there, first in New York the night he was shot, and then in Dallas with Rather. And I felt there were times where television held the country together. And that was one of the times.
The nation tried to hold itself together through the tumultuous times ahead. New York City, still reeling from national uncertainty, faced its own crisis of spirit. Kitty Genovese, murdered on a street in Queens.
According to the official police investigation, of the 38 people who heard or saw what was happening, not one of them called police at that time.
And just when things seemed darkest,
I want to once again assure all of our fellow New Yorkers there's no need for any panic whatsoever. The source of the breakdown has been found at the major power junction 10 miles west of Buffalo.
the blackout tested the ingenuity of all of us, including Channel 2's Mike Wallace. What does a reporter ask when the answer is as obvious as the question?
What happened? The lights on the Pan Am building went out first, and then it started coming over to the west side here and blacked out all of Broadway.
And there was virtually nothing to talk about because nobody knew what was going on, least of all myself. We weren't sure that we were making it back to the studio. But we didn't know whether there were lines open or whether it was being broadcast or not.
Channel 2 weathered this crisis along with the rest of the Northeast and continued getting the story out even if nobody was able to see it. Eventually, we pinned our hopes on a handsome, charismatic new mayor. Unfortunately, our problems were only beginning. There was a transit strike.
Only essential services and only people whose work is critical to a company or firm should come to work.
A garbage strike, now brought to you in living color.
I am not satisfied with the plan devised to end the strike.
And desperate new confrontations that set Newark and Harlem ablaze.
On the second floor!
In 1950, there were only a few thousand TV sets in this area. By the end of the 60s, there were millions.
Channel 2 had become an important part of this community. But the question was, did any of us like what we were seeing?